let me introduce you to our tonight's theme, which is a little bit unusual. Not very many times you hear this. It's the ever-changing speed of the planets. Is that change of speed of the planets affecting their attributes? Because we know that the moon has these attributes, and Mercury this, and Venus that other attributes. And we consider those attributes fixed. They never change. But what about if each of those planets is changing its velocity, its daily motion? Because they do actually. We consider them quite normal, like they have a normal velocity, steady, but no, apparently nothing is steady in the universe. It's as if it were steady and normal, but it's not. Everything is a little bit diverse. It's not exactly steady and normal and, constant. Everything is changing, always. So let's see specifically how the planets change their speed. Let me get to the next picture. That's a beautiful depiction of our solar system. And you can see the orbits of the planets over here, and they look pretty normal. It's like they are cyclical orbits. They are not. They are almost cyclical. But they are not like that. Let me move to the next picture. Well, this is a simple sketch of an ideal cyclical orbit of a planet around the sun. You can see in the center the sun, and around it you can see the orbit in blue of a planet. And ideally that orbit should be cyclical. And you know something, the ancient astrologers thought that the orbits of the planets were cyclical because they couldn't know. You cannot distinguish whether the orbit of a planet is cyclical or not unless you have a telescope in your hands. That's why people realize that the orbits of the planets are not cyclical, but actually elliptical, as they say, as soon as we discovered the telescope. You know, Galileo and all of these people. And even at that period, we had Kepler, who was lucky because Kepler, a poor guy, quite poor, and he had a huge family, and he was unlucky with his family. Anyway, Capricorn, what do you expect? Hardships, a lot of hardships in his life. But he was lucky because he was working for a very rich Danish guy named Tycho Brahe, who had calculated minutiously with precision the orbits of the planets and had a huge data of the calculations he had made with his own telescope in an island of Denmark that is called Urania something, reminds me of planet Uranus, and in Greece, Urania is celestial. So I would love to go someday. I love islands, being a Greek, but an island called celestial something, Urania. I would love to go to that Danish island. So this is a more realistic depiction of the orbits of the planets around the sun. You see, their orbit is a little bit like an egg. It's not cyclical. It's not perfect. It's Gazis. It's elliptical, as they say. A more realistic elliptical orbit of a planet around the sun. This is the hard part of my talk. We have to go back to our school years. Relax. I'm not gonna give you some complicated mathematics right now, but we have to check out Kepler's laws, two of them at least. Kepler is a nice guy. He has been a great astronomer, amazing astronomer. Plus, he was an amazing astrologer. Today's astronomers are claiming that Kepler was a scientist. He was an astronomer and not an astrologer. He was erecting charts just to make his daily bread. He didn't love astrology. That's a huge lie. Kepler was crazy about astrology, esotericism as well. So let's go back to school. You hated Kepler. Here I am. I'm going to give you the good Kepler right now. Because as you saw before, the orbit of the planets, it's not cyclical, but elliptical. Egg, yes. So we have here the first law of Kepler, which says exactly this. The orbit of a planet is an ellipse, not a cycle, right? You say big deal. It was big deal like almost 500 years ago, right? It was a big deal back then to discover that the orbits of the planets were not cyclical, but eggies, elliptical, reminded of an egg. So the orbit of a planet is an ellipse with the sun at one of the two foci. I speak Italian, I would rather pronounce it foci, but obviously in English it's foci, focus. So you see, an ellipse is like a squeezed cycle. If we get a hoop and we squeeze it, we get an ellipse. And when we squeeze the cycle and we form an ellipse, the center tends to be divided and it becomes two centers, two focus, right? And the more we squeeze the cyclical hoop, the more the foci are distant. They go away from each other, right? And you can see in this diagram. On the left, there is focus 1, and on the right, you can see focus 2, and the sun is located exactly in that focus 2, right? Strange thing. I mean, it's quite strange that the universe obeys the mathematical geometrical laws